So we see these two brothers wanting one blessing and fighting for it. These two sisters envying one another, using whatever strategies they can think of to get what they're seeking, to attempt to get what they're seeking. They're all longing for something they don't have and wrestling with each other because of it. So where is God in all of this? Why is this drama and this wrestling, this rivalry that really kind of finds parallels in like Netflix series and things, why is it part of our scripture? It's almost, it's uncomfortable to dig into some of these details and understand what's going on and say, this is part of our sacred story. What's going on, God? Why would you put this here? One of the things that helps me in my own wrestlings with these texts is to kind of zoom out a bit and look at what we don't see in the specific details, but that we do see in the bigger picture. If we zoom out and look at the whole Genesis story, there's something important to notice, which is that at the end of Genesis, Rachel's son Joseph rescues the family from famine, which allows them to survive. The sibling rivalries continue, and Joseph is sold into slavery in Egypt by his brothers. But in the end, because he's in Egypt, when there's a famine in his homeland, the family is able to go to Egypt, where Joseph is able to feed them, and they reconnect. Somehow, in this process, there's this thread that is why we get all of these stories at all today. And then if you keep zooming out to the whole of the Old Testament, you see that Leah's son Judah's descendants include King David, under whose leadership Israel prospers. Which makes me think that which makes me know that God's love isn't limited like Jacob's love. There's enough love in God to include both Leah and Rachel and each of their children in what God is doing in the world. And then keep zooming out. Leah's son, Judah's line, eventually leads to Jesus, which means that Jesus is Leah's descendant. How amazing that is. And what about Jacob and Esau? There's a beautiful reunion scene later in Genesis when Jacob comes home to Esau. He's kind of forced to because things with Laban get so bad. Jacob's kind of a reactive person, and so he'll move around and do what he has to do. And he's heading home. He's expecting to be harmed, to have to beg his brother to be welcomed back in, or to at least have to pay a whole lot of cattle for it. But instead, when Esau goes out to meet his brother, he just embraces him, kind of the way that the father embraces the prodigal son in Jesus' parable. So it's a scene that helps me get a sense of maybe what Isaac is trying to say at the end of today's reading, when he says that Esau will tear away Jacob's harness from his neck. In a reverse of expectation, maybe Esau does that by finding a way to be free of his anger at his brother that holds him captive, to the point that he can welcome him back into his family. So the storyline of Jacob and Esau, of Leah and Rachel, it serpentines into future stories. And through them all, God is present even if they don't see it and get it, even if sometimes it's hard for us to see it and get it. We see that God's blessing isn't limited like Isaac's blessing. God's love isn't limited like Jacob's love. That there's enough love in God to go around. There's enough room in the story for each of these stories to find their place. That's the promise. That's the gospel.